Order. Before we come to the statement from the Secretary of State for Education, I must once again note Mr. Speaker's disappointment about briefing to the media before important announcements are brought to this House. This is based on the Government's own rules in its Ministerial Code. As the Public Administration and Constitutional Affairs Committee recently stated, making the most important statements in the first instance to Parliament means doing so before they are made to the media and not at the first available opportunity thereafter. The Government either needs to adhere to its own rules or change them. I come to the Secretary of State.
Madam Deputy Speaker, please allow me to begin by saying that the unauthorised leaking of elements of today's announcement is deeply regrettable. I have already asked officials to launch a full investigation into the source to ensure that such breaches do not happen again. With permission, Madam Deputy Speaker, I will now make a statement to update the House on this Government's work to transform education in this country. Because childhood is changing. Our children are growing up in a world of ever-increasing connectivity and communication. But uncertainty and mistrust are on the rise too. Our children have the curiosity, the resilience and the enterprise to succeed. But a vision for education that stops at the school gates has failed to deliver the opportunities that they need. Under the last government, absence was at historic highs. Despite the heroic efforts of staff, the disadvantage gap is still stubbornly wide. Children with SEND still sidelined. Bright pupils still left to drift along. A system of high standards but for some, but not for others, is not good enough. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, high standards and inclusion must go hand in hand. The last government's vision for education was too narrow. No school is an island. And for children to do well, we need to look outside as well as inside the classroom. We need to rebuild the services on which families rely. That's why we've acted fast, beginning to remove the stain of child poverty, rolling out free breakfast clubs, expanding free school meals and removing the two-child limit. I am deeply proud that this Labour government will have lifted more than 500,000 children out of poverty by 2030. We've also delivered the expansion of 30 hours of government-funded childcare. We're rolling out Best Start family hubs and we'll fund a SEND practitioner in every hub. And now, today, we go further. We're publishing our schools white paper, a vision for schools not as a standalone, but at the heart of happy and healthy childhoods. For every child, a great local school. A school of ambition and achievement. A school filled with sport, music, drama. A school of high standards and inclusion. And let there be no doubt, standards will rise for all children. Those born under this Labour government will, on average, leave school with a grade 5 or higher across their GCSEs. And I will not have higher standards for some, while others are left behind. The disadvantage gap was as stark in 2024 as a decade before. And now, Madam Deputy Speaker, we will cut it in half. We'll boost the impact of the pupil premium and the national funding formula, consulting on better targeting. And we'll deliver 3 big shifts in our schools. The first, from narrow to broad, capturing the true breadth of opportunity, starting before children even reach the classroom with our Best Start family hubs. To improve the transition into reception, we'll establish partnerships between early years and schools, and staff will work together to help children settle. School days will be energised by a broad and rich curriculum, the knowledge and the skills for all of our young people to succeed. And we'll consult on measuring attainment and progress, improving the Progress 8 measure to strengthen the academic core and to support students to pursue subjects which strengthen our economy and our society, like drama, art and design, if that is the route that they want to take. High expectations and standards for all, and nowhere more so than reading. The ability to read opens up a world of opportunity, and falling behind locks too many children out of learning. So our new Year 8 reading test will help them to stay on track. But currently, Madam Deputy Speaker, too many children are sidelined, held back, their needs not met. We know the biggest challenges are concentrated in some communities. And that's why we'll launch and fund 2 place-focused education missions, Mission North East and Mission Coastal. We will transform the life chances of local young people and draw a blueprint for national change, an education system that works for every child. And that's why our second shift from sidelined to included, to inject excellence and rigour into the learning of every child. But as a society, we have let those expectations slip for children with special educational needs and disabilities. Now, members across this House, we all know that our SEND system isn't working. They've heard it from their constituents. Parents who are tired of fighting, fed up with sending their children out of their communities to have their needs met, angry that their child's future is being written off. Madam Deputy Speaker, parents and children have been failed, and they have been failed for too long. That is the reality that this government inherited from the Conservatives. A system that was designed with the best of intentions, but one that became lose, 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 in the words of my predecessor, because of the choices and then the inaction of the party opposite. A system that drove local councils again and again to put process above people. Support was stripped away, forcing parents to run a legal gauntlet for what should have been their child's by right. Support that all too often just didn't materialise, and today that changes. Madam Deputy Speaker, we will fix the SEND system once and for all. Yeah. Today is a realisation of those children's rights, the right to high expectations and outcomes and the support to fulfil them. Far more local children going to school with their friends in their local communities close to home. Better for them, and evidence suggests better for the whole class too. Yep. Over the next 3 years, we'll invest more than £1.6 billion to strengthen the mainstream inclusion offer. And for those children whose needs cannot be met through universal support, there will now be 3 further layers of support: targeted, targeted plus and specialist, available from day one when a child needs them. Schools will now have a statutory duty to record and monitor each child's special needs and provision in an individual support plan. We will fortify mainstream provision with our new National Experts at Hand initiative, backed by £1.8 billion of new investment. Educational psychologists, occupational and speech and language therapists in our schools supporting our teachers, benefiting our children. And earlier this month, we announced huge investment in school buildings too. So every secondary school will have an inclusion base, a dedicated space to bridge the gap between mainstream and specialist provision, because this is about improving support, not removing support. Children with the most complex needs will still have access to education, health and care plans, derived from a specialist provision package of support designed by experts. And we know that insightful, holistic inclusion happens when schools share their expertise and their resources. So we'll strengthen school strategic SEND partnerships, with every school becoming part of a local SEND group. Our new national inclusion standards will set out clear evidence-based guidance for support. To restore parents' trust in the system, we'll improve the mediation and school complaints process, making the SEND Tribunal the genuine mechanism of last resort. And we'll give the Children's Commissioner a new remit to oversee our SEND reforms. I also want to thank every parent, every organisation and every group that has taken part in our national conversation on SEND. And I also want to take this opportunity, Madam Deputy Speaker, to pay tribute to my humble friends from Newcastle upon Tyne North and Queen's Park and Maida Vale for driving forward that work. But this isn't the end of the conversation, and I urge everyone to get involved as today we launch our national SEND consultation. To parents, carers, support staff, teachers, experts and leaders, I ask you to work with us. We're building a system for children with SEND that will be unrecognisable from what came before. And we're putting in the investment, the care and the time to get this right, with a smooth transition from 2030. Madam Deputy Speaker, schools need engagement from without as well as within, communities coming together to support every child. So our final shift will be from withdrawn to engaged. We need to mend the broken social contract, helping children feel that they belong in school. Calm, inclusive classrooms that welcome children with different needs, guarded by high standards for behaviour and attendance. Schools building deep and meaningful partnerships with parents, inviting them in to see how their child can achieve and thrive. We'll establish minimum expectations for home-to-school partnerships, making clear what families can expect from schools and what schools can expect of families. Excellent support staff, teachers and school leaders can transform children's lives. But too many incredible young women in particular are still leaving the profession. So I'm putting an end to a quarter century of standstill and boosting maternity pay. And I want to spread the excellence of our wonderful staff. So we'll put purposeful collaboration at the heart of our education system. Strong school trusts are vital, sharing what works and driving improvement. So all schools will move towards forming or joining a high-quality trust, and will empower local authorities and partnerships to establish trusts too. We'll work with the sector through this significant change, and we'll set high expectations through new trust standards and introduce trust inspection by Ofsted. Madam Deputy Speaker, we in this House have a responsibility to look beyond the here and now. A duty not just to run the country of today, but to shape the society of tomorrow. And members will agree that in Britain, background should be no barrier. Success should be open to all. Talent, invention and hard work should matter more than class and connection. That stronger, fairer Britain is possible. But to make it true in our country, first we have to make it true in our schools. True for the little boys and girls now sitting in our classrooms, who can become the thoughtful and engaged citizens to take us towards the 22nd century. For them, we must come together now, today, and build a Britain of opportunity for all. And I commend this statement to the House.
Cabinet Secretary of State, Laura Trott.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the Right Honourable Lady for advance sight of her statement and to her officials and advisers for briefing me over the weekend. I pay tribute to those who pulled together the 300 pages of document, which I will now attempt to scrutinise in the 5 minutes that I have available to me today. To turn firstly to SEND. The principle of more support in schools, evidence-led packages and early intervention and more speech and language therapists are welcome. But despite the 300 pages, there is still much that we do not know. We don't know exactly how children will qualify for an EHCP in the future. There is no clear eligibility criteria for so-called specialist provision set out. There will be around 7 packages of support when you get an EHCP, but we are not told what these packages of support are, how you qualify for them, or how much money will be associated with each. It makes it quite difficult to judge how effective this new system will be, let alone legislate for it. Many questions also spring from the individual support plans or ISPs, which will take place in schools. It's not clear from the document what will trigger an ISP, nor the funding that will be associated with it. Generally, at the moment, schools have to cover the first £6,000 of support before an EHCP is triggered. What will the new threshold be for schools to cover? And further, on funding, I note the £1.6 billion pot for inclusive mainstream provision over 3 years. This equates to £24,000 per year per school if divided evenly across every school in England. That's nowhere near enough for the extra work that schools are going to have to cover to write individual tailored ISPs for every SEND child. This is a mammoth burden to place on schools, one that I don't necessarily think is misplaced, but £24,000 a year is not enough to help them manage it. It's not a recipe for inclusion, it's a recipe for disaster. Can the Education Secretary tell schools what additional funding will be available to help them hire extra SENCO support to help them deal with these pressures? The workforce plan for 6,500 teachers, which incidentally will not deliver 6,500 more teachers, unbelievably also says nothing about special educational needs provision within the workforce. Perhaps because it's trying to ignore primary schools altogether. And on wider funding, the government still has not said how the £6 billion black hole on SEND funding identified the OBR will be filled. The latest I read today in the FT is that this is going to come from councils. Would the Right Honourable Lady care to confirm? And the funding pots announced today, is this new money or is it coming from the department's existing overall budget? Has the DfE's budget expanded beyond what was set out of the spending review on the budget, and if so, by how much? And will these reforms save money and over what time period? And lastly, on SEND, Ministers have repeatedly failed over the weekend to give clarity on reassessments. So I will give the Right Honourable Lady one more opportunity. Will she rule out that any child who currently has an EHCP will have it removed? Yes or no? Yeah. Now, turning to the wider school white paper, we have the absurdity, Madam Deputy Speaker, of a white paper that says that trusts will be the main driver of system-led improvement. But in the schools bill, the department are proposing to take away the academy order where underperforming schools are taken over by trusts. Either trusts are a driver for improvement of schools or they aren't. I think they very much are. And it seems the Education Secretary now agrees. So I ask the Education Secretary, with the zeal of a convert, will she disavow her earlier sins and reinstate the academy order? Yeah. And on that theme, the white paper says our best school trusts innovate and drive excellence in standards. Well, they used to be able to, Madam Deputy Speaker, but the schools bill takes away their ability to innovate on the curriculum, who they employ, the terms and conditions of employment, and even on uniform. Again, I'm delighted by this turnaround from the Education Secretary, but I ask that this is reflected in the actual legislation that the Education Secretary is putting through the House. I fundamentally disagree with the proposal in the white paper to emphasise inclusion where it comes to suspensions and exclusions. This is the wrong approach. If a pupil is behaving in a way which makes fellow pupils or a teacher unsafe, it is utterly wrong to hesitate to exclude because of inclusion. We have seen in tragic cases of Harvey Wilgos, when pressure is put on schools not to exclude, how wrong it can go. We must not make the same mistake again. There is much more to cover, Madam Deputy Speaker, on funding reform, admission codes, and work I would actually praise, for example, on maternity pay, but I dare not risk your wrath. So I will close by saying that we support the principle of reform, but there is precious little clarity for SEND parents today.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'll seek to respond to the Right Honourable Lady's questions. I welcome the broadly constructive approach that she has taken, but it would be remiss of me not to point out that so many of the problems that we're dealing with today were left behind by the party opposite. And an ounce of humility, an ounce of contrition or understanding as to how we got here today, I think would really enlighten our understanding of what we need to do to make change happen. As I said in my statement, I do recognise that the intentions behind the 2014 reforms were good intentions, but it became very clear very quickly that problems were developing within that system. And she asks about council deficits, she asks about the challenge. That became pretty clear pretty quickly, Madam Deputy Speaker. And it was in 2019 that the Conservatives brought in the statutory override because it was clear that councils were struggling with the increasing demands that they were facing. But that didn't just happen in isolation. It happened because of the period between 2010 and 2019. Family support services were stripped away. Sure Start centres closed, early help went, children were left to struggle, and we stored up problems for the future. And that is part of the reason that we continue to see escalating need in our school system, because of the failure to identify and support children sooner. And today, Madam Deputy Speaker, we put that right. We address the challenges that children and families face at the earliest possible point. We don't wait until years down the line when things have reached crisis point. That's as true in our schools as it is in children's social care. And it's why also, Madam Deputy Speaker, we will take action to clamp down on the massive expansion we have seen of private equity-backed independent specialist provision that is sucking money out of our education system into profit when this should be focused on outcomes for children. The Right Honourable Lady asks about specialist provision packages. We have published a document setting out the shape and nature of those packages. I intend to appoint an expert panel with clinical and education expertise to shape those packages, to make sure that we have clear national standards, not a postcode lottery, as we have seen in the past. And on individual support plans, our intention is that they will be easy to use, digital, and can move between different settings. Many settings will already do this, but we want the consistency that comes with having one system. And Ofsted will also look carefully at how settings are using ISPs in order to judge effective inclusion. She asks whether this is about saving money and what the time period is, and she asks about the OBR's projections. I should say that the figure quoted by the OBR was a projection based on an unreformed system. We are reforming the system. We are investing upfront to deliver reform. This is not about cutting costs or saving money or arbitrary targets or reducing numbers. This is about better support and better outcomes for children. The way in which she framed her point about inclusion was fundamentally wrong and misjudged. Of course, schools should take action when violent incidents take place, but that is not the same thing as making sure that schools are catering to children with special educational needs and disabilities, and there is a need for caution in how we approach this point. Where it comes to the transition to the new system, this will be a careful and a phased transition over the course of the decade, and it will not be until 2030 at the earliest that the new system will be fully operational. We are taking the time to manage this, to get it right as children move from one system to the next system. Very finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Right Honourable Lady asks about the role for trusts. She asks about the government's approach. It was the last Labour government that introduced academies to drive up standards in our most disadvantaged communities. But I see no conflict at all between the approach that we are taking and insisting that children should be taught by qualified teachers and that their parents should be confident that the national curriculum is being followed. It was the Conservatives that first introduced the national curriculum. They were right to do so then, and we still back that now. But I do think it is right that parents should expect a qualified teacher, and they shouldn't expect to be paying the earth where it comes to school uniform. Madam Deputy Speaker, this is a conversation I have no doubt will continue in the weeks and months ahead. I relish the opportunity to set out this government's ambition for every child in our country. This is a golden opportunity to shape our school system to deliver better, earlier and more timely support for children that have been let down for too long, and this Labour government will turn it around.
Mother of the House, Diane Abbott.
The Secretary of State will be aware how traumatic it is to grow up and support a child with special educational needs. She will also be aware that disproportionate numbers of those children come from marginalised communities. And she will be aware the anxiety of these parents now that these reforms will not mean in the long run that children will lose access to support that they are legally entitled to now. The Secretary of State has said that she wants to reform the SEND system once and for all. But you can't reform it without the work and the support staff. Just recently, a London borough has seen a third of its staff resign. How can she assure the House that, as well as her aspirations, which we will share, she will make sure that the staff are there, that are paid, that do not have the pressures they currently have to deliver on her hopes?
I'm grateful to my right honourable friend. She is right to identify that far too many groups within our country, marginalised communities, are let down by a system that forces parents to fight. The intention of what we're setting out today is to make it easier for parents and easier for children to get early support and better support without having to go through a legal bureaucratic process that sadly sometimes parents who don't have resource are not able to take part in. The Children's Commissioner is also going to consider those questions of disproportionality and will continue to give us oversight of the system as we make that transition. And I do recognise the point that she raises around the need to support staff, both recruiting and retaining staff. But this is not simply what we're setting out today around the Schools White Paper and SEND. It is part of our wider approach on children's social care, on investing in early help and family prevention, and of course our action on child poverty that will make a huge and material difference to the life chances of children.
Liberal Democrat leader Sir Ed Davey.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I thank the Secretary of State for advance sight of her statement. And I declare an interest as my son has an EHCP. It's critical to John's education and our whole family's well-being. And that's why, like so many families, we've been dreading today. We all know the crisis in SEND must end. The fights, the exhaustion, the underfunding, the private profiteering, all must change. And that's why the Conservative failure to apologise for the crisis really angered me and will have infuriated families across the country. But as we fix this crisis, children's rights must not be stripped away. So as we consider her proposals seriously, we'll continue to listen to them and champion all the families whose lives could be impacted profoundly. Let me start with 3 questions. First, early intervention. This is critical for improving children's lives and for making the whole system affordable. And I worry these modest changes won't shift the dial. Will she consider investing in universal screening and then active support for the child and their family earlier on? Second, on the plans for EHCPs. Speaking both for my family and many others like mine, it's hard to believe the range and complexity of needs and disability can be captured in a small number of pre-defined EHCP packages. So can the Secretary of State guarantee her changes mean the voices of parents, the real experts on their children, will at long last be heard when decisions are made? And finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, on changing the pupil premium, devised, championed and introduced by this party, will the Secretary of State give a clear commitment that no individual child, wherever they live, will see their pupil premium funding reduced? And will she instead boost the pupil premium to put right the cuts and betrayals of the Conservative Party?
Secretary of State.
I'm grateful to the right honourable gentleman. I know he cares very deeply about this as a parent as well as a politician, and I'm grateful to the approach that he has taken, and I look forward to working with him and his party in the weeks and months to come. I think we share a commitment to wanting to make sure that as we move from one system, which we all can agree is not working, that the move to a better system is done in a careful and phased way, and yes, where the voices of parents are heard right throughout that process. He asks about early support, Madam Deputy Speaker. I completely agree, and that's why we're investing £1 billion in rolling out Best Start family hubs, why we're also expanding early years education, school-based nurseries, and investing in local authorities' ability to develop early help. And that's why colleagues will note through the material that we've published, we continue to see an increase in EHCPs in the years to come before we start to see a plateauing and then a reduction. And the reason for that is that we want to do this in a managed way. I would hope that we could reduce that more quickly, not for any arbitrary reason, not because we're chasing a number, but because we should be supporting children much earlier. The evidence of Sure Start was clear that if we step in earlier and support families, we reduce the need for SEND support later on in school. But that's because we've met that need more quickly, especially in areas like speech and language support. I understand the point he makes around transition and education, health and care plans. And we've already set out some detail as to specialist provision packages. They will be shaped by an expert panel, independent of government. We will put that on statute, and there will be clear national accountability and national standards to move away from the postcode lottery that we've seen in recent times. I know he is also interested in how we can ensure that cases of high need and low incidence are also addressed through regional models. That is something that we've committed to considering through the consultation. And the voices of parents will be heard as we move this forward. We have launched our consultation that will run for 12 weeks. There will be events the length and breadth of the country for parents to take part in that conversation. And I would urge parents, health staff, education staff and others to share their views on what we have published and make sure that we are getting this right. On the pupil premium and on the targeting of disadvantaged funding, what I'm keen to address is the fact that free school meals as a measure is quite a blunt way to assess disadvantage within a family. And what we know is that children who are on free school meals or face persistent disadvantage and persistent poverty right throughout their school career are far more likely to have bad outcomes at the end than children who spent a period of time in poverty. So I do think we need to have a more nuanced approach to how we can better target resource to better improve outcomes for children. But we will be consulting on that, and I look forward to discussing it with him further.
Select Committee Chair Helen Hayes.
I welcome the publication of the Schools White Paper the clear statement of intent from the Government on narrowing the attainment gap and consultation on SEND reform today. I appreciate the time the Government has taken to listen to parents, carers and children and young people across the country who are being failed by the current SEND system in preparing these reforms. And I am encouraged to see many of the priorities identified by the Education Select Committee in our report, Solving the SEND Crisis, in the consultation paper, including early identification of need, reform of mainstream provision and strengthened accountability. The Secretary of State knows that it is impossible to overstate the anxiety of parents and carers who have been failed by the current system about what reform will mean for them, and that rebuilding their trust must be central to the Government's approach. Parents and carers are particularly anxious about the requirement in the proposals for a child with an education, health and care plan to be reassessed at the end of their current stage of education. So can I ask the Secretary of State what assurance she can give to those parents who are worried about this change, that reassessment will not mean loss of support, that their views will be listened to during the 12-week consultation period, and that the Government remains flexible to respond to the feedback that is received?
Kate.
I'm grateful to the Chair of the Select Committee and grateful to her and the whole committee for the very serious report and work that they have done, and she will see reflected in what we're setting out today that the work that they have undertaken has shaped our approach, and I'm grateful to the committee and all of the members of it for their support in this. I completely recognise what she says around the anxiety and worry of parents. I mean, I've spoken to parents the length and breadth of the country about the fights they've had to go through, how tough it has been to secure the support that their children need. And I also want to thank and pay tribute to our SEND Development Group, who've worked so closely with us to make sure that parents' voices, carers' voices and the voices of children and those delivering services have been heard as we shape our reforms. We do want to do this carefully. This is a decade-long process and a decade-long transition that we are embarking upon. And from now until the commencement of legislation in 2029, the current system, with all of its existing duties and rights, will continue. And after this, and only after this, will we begin to move children through our new system of support. Of course, she will recognise that children should be assessed annually through the EHCP process. Frequently that doesn't happen, or it doesn't happen well. But our intention is to deliver better and expanded support more quickly for a wider group of children, and to manage this carefully, and the commitment that all children in specialist provision with an EHCP will be able to remain within specialist provision unless their parents take the decision to move. I do recognise the wider point about transition, especially in post-16, and that is an area we also want to continue to work with colleges and providers on to make sure the smoothest move for children, which has been an area that I know she's taken great interest in and has been flagged to us as a real concern.
Sir Iain Duncan-Smith.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I say to the Right Honourable Lady, I welcome obviously her ambition in all of this, but where in all of this does she retain, or will she retain, the power to do something about councils that simply fail completely? An Ofsted report of my local council referred to them as disjointed, weak coordination, limited accountability, services falling short, parents being ignored, EHCPs never being granted when they should be. This is the reality for many of the parents that I meet who are petrified. So an assurance about what can be done about local councils' failure, but also, as she speaks about EHCPs now, I've talked to parents recently and they are very worried, very, very worried, who struggle to try and get an EHCP, are worried now that somehow they won't get that or they will lose it. Could she reassure them that that will not happen?
So on EHCPs, that transition will, in terms of phase review, will take place in 29-30 for commencement in the academic year starting 2030. So the children to whom that would apply are currently in year 2. So in the time that we have available to us now, we will build up the system. It will be transformed from where we are now with the new investment that I've set out. And this is genuinely new money and new investment that will make a huge difference. And there will be more support like an EHCP available without the fight for an EHCP. We used to have a system that delivered more of that. It was pulled away, and we need to make it much more central to the work of schools. He is right to raise the question about the responsibilities of local authorities. And whilst we have acted together with colleagues across government to address the long-standing deficits that have accrued over many years that councils have built up, and committed to writing down 90% of that. I should just say to local authorities that will only happen, and that money, that write-down will only follow if they produce SEND plans that will deliver the places, deliver the accountability and deliver the support for children. We will not tolerate failure. I will not tolerate failure.
Much shorter questions, please. Peter Swallow.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I've spoken to countless parents of SEND children in my constituency who have described the constant fight to get support for their children, constantly having to battle to get a piece of paper that sets out rights that they then cannot even access because the support has not been there. Could the Secretary of State set out what this new system will mean for the day-to-day lives of children and their parents, and how we can rebuild trust after so many have been let down for so long?
I'm grateful to my honourable friend who I know really has championed this cause locally and is doing a huge amount to make sure that his constituents get the best possible education and care for their children. The principal difference here is that support will come earlier, more quickly, and families won't have to fight so hard to get what they need. Children won't need a statutory plan, they won't need an EHCP to receive targeted support. And this support will be designed with parents through individual support plans and with extra investment going in. The investment that I've announced today alone is an extra £4 billion. That will make a huge difference to families across the country.
Sir Oliver Dowden.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. One of the greatest frustrations parents of children with special educational needs in Hertsmere and across the country feel is understanding what is going on in relation to their children. What reassurance can she give parents that in particular councils will be required to keep parents up to date with what's happening with their children, and moreover what provision they will have prior to the final outcome, whether it's the EHCP or a specialist school?
Secretary of State.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I've heard that in relation to lots of councils in lots of parts of the country. It is clear that there is a wider problem that arose out of the 2014 reforms and what that asked of councils. But it's also clear that there is huge variation between councils. Some councils that are doing this incredibly well, that have invested, that have created the places that are needed and make assessments happen quickly and work well with parents. It is also very clear to me that there are councils who are doing this badly and poorly, and I would say to those councils that there will be no excuses for failure with the extra investment that's coming.
Mark Sewards.
Madam Deputy Speaker, as a teacher and now an MP, I know just how broken our current SEND system is. Many parents are deeply scarred by their fights with the current system, and so will understandably treat any reforms with scepticism, no matter our intention. So I absolutely welcome the introduction of individual support plans alongside EHCPs to ensure students get the support they deserve. But what assurances can the Secretary of State give parents that we will genuinely enforce their legal right to an education with these new plans?
Madam Deputy Speaker, through the plans that we're setting out today, we will be expanding legal rights for children. More children will be able to benefit from targeted support than is the case at the moment. But I also want to make clear that every child should have the right to go to a great local mainstream school. It cannot be, we cannot continue to allow for the situation where many children are sent far from home, away from their friends, and aren't fully established within their communities. We know the damage that causes later on in life. And whilst I do recognise the real worry and anxiety that parents have, that the system isn't working but change is difficult and needs to be managed properly, I would encourage those parents to review the consultation, to see what we have set out and to continue to work with us and to respond to that consultation to make sure their voices are heard.
Julian Smith.
Speaker, I welcome the section on training in the SEND consultation, but much of that training is not put on a statutory basis. Could she confirm her thinking on that? And could she also confirm that autism and profiles of autism, such as PDA, will be at the centre of that training?
Dave.
Yes, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I know my right honourable friend takes a real interest in this area and has long campaigned for further training and support for staff. Of course, one of the areas where we've seen some of the greatest expansion in need is around autism, and it is right that we better equip our teachers and our staff with what they need to support children. There will be a new requirement set out in the SEND Code of Practice for all settings to ensure that staff receive training on SEND and inclusion. We will embed that expectation across early years, schools and colleges, and we're investing the money to make sure that that can happen.
Hi, Ali.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the statement today by the Secretary of State. In my own constituency of Houghton and Moseley, many parents are frustrated with the system, with the current system, the way it's broken. It's not fit for purpose and it does not meet the needs of children. Will the Secretary of State let us know the details about the complex cases, because what we don't want is that to be at the cost of the care and the need that children need. And secondly, those that do end up in the tribunal, that the tribunals will be properly funded so there's no lengthy delays like currently of over 12 months.
Thanks.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I've heard from conversations with parents, with campaigners and others, the importance of making sure that there is strong accountability and redress so that when things go wrong, parents are able to have that put right. That's why we will be retaining a role for the tribunal in the new system. And it's also why we are setting out our intention to ensure that more children with complex needs can be assessed more quickly, often children born with life-limiting conditions or very complex needs. Their parents spend months and years, even when it can be the case that the child may not even have very long to live. We have to bring that to an end. We have to make sure that children with complex needs get the support made available to them much more quickly. And through the consultation, we intend to do that.
Manuela Patgela.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Prioritising early years intervention is fundamental to stop needs from escalating and affecting the entire educational journeys of children. So what concrete steps will the government take to invest, for example, as we heard, in universal screening programmes or high-quality specialist training for all staff, or even for each school to have access to speech and language therapists, so that support is given at point of need?
Madam Deputy Speaker, we are massively expanding investment in the early years, and staff in early years will be part of that training requirement, and we will make sure they have the resources to do that. But I also agree that access to speech and language provision is one of the greatest issues that has been identified. That's why the funding that we're putting in, the £1.8 billion of extra investment, will allow schools to work with local authorities, with ICBs, to deliver more speech and language support directly into schools without parents having to go through that fight for an EHCP in order to secure provision.
Rena Brackenridge.
Madam Deputy Speaker, those who work in education, as I did, will know of the creaking bureaucratic SEND system that too often puts specialists behind paperwork rather than directly benefiting children more directly. Can the Secretary of State explain how her SEND reforms will put children's needs first and give schools access to specialists like speech and language therapists, education psychologists when needed, and not after some awful adversarial process?
Thank you.
I couldn't agree more with my honourable friend. I've heard time and again from educational psychologists, from SENCOs, from speech and language therapists, that they spent all of that time training to work with children to deliver better support and to drive up standards across a setting. But they find themselves sat at a desk, sending emails, filling out forms. I want those amazing and talented professionals to be working with children, delivering change, and the move to a more flexible system away from that bureaucracy, away from that fight, will free up a lot of the time for those amazing people to do that work.
Lewis Cocking.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The SEND system needs urgent and serious reform. Families I speak to in Broxbourne have been battling against an unfair funding formula that sees pupils get thousands of pounds less than elsewhere in the country. Can the Secretary of State reassure me and my constituents that historic demand will no longer be a factor in allocating funding, so that the system is truly fair for every child?
State.
Madam Deputy Speaker, we will be consulting on the national funding formula and on whether we will make changes there. But I would say this change is urgent, it's much needed, and it falls to this Labour government to deliver.
Iain Lavery.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Every MP in the House will have had parents come together to explain the difficulties they're facing with regards to accessing support for their children. They're on their knees, they're desperate, they're distraught. It's adversarial and quite often results in a negative result at the end of the day. Can my right honourable friend advise me and reassure this House that any new system that's set up will be quick, easy, accessible and less adversarial?
Yes, Madam Deputy Speaker, that is exactly our intention. I know that parents have fought really hard and will continue to fight really hard to get the support that their children need. But I also know that there are lots of families in our country that don't have the fight in them because of poverty, because of disadvantage, because they are marginalised. And what those families need is early and timely support that doesn't require them to hire a lawyer, doesn't require them to go to a tribunal, and that is exactly what we will deliver.
Caroline Bowden.
Speaker, I applaud the government's attempt to increase mainstream inclusion with SEND and welcome the £1.8 billion set aside for children to have access to experts. But there's absolutely no mention, as far as I can see in the white paper, of any new funding for increasing the number of teaching assistants who will be vital in delivering this expansion of mainstream provision. So can the Secretary of State explain how the government will achieve its aim of making mainstream schools more inclusive for students with SEND without a serious uplift in the number of assistants supporting classroom teachers?
Secretary of State.
Madam Deputy Speaker, we are already investing much more into our schools. What we're setting out today is the additional new investment, including £1.6 billion, that will allow schools to consider how best they can meet need. And they will, of course, consider how best to deploy teaching assistant support, one-to-one interventions, small group interventions and teaching support too. I would also say, through the consultation, we are considering how better we can support the SENCOs within our system to drive expertise and change across a setting, because, again, some of our best and most talented SEND staff are spending too much time sat in offices when they should be working directly with teaching assistants and others in order to make improvements for all children across their school.
Darren Paffy.
Deputy Speaker, and can I thank my right honourable friend for a statement that doesn't just try to fix the cracks, the deep cracks that have embedded in this broken system over recent years, but sets out a wholesale vision for transforming it.
Absolutely.
This will be long overdue and much needed by parents, students and teachers, but what my right honourable friend will know that while the system is on its knees, there is a lot of good practice already out there. So can she confirm how she will harness the best that we've seen in our schools, including in Southampton, to make sure that this gets the earliest and fullest support for our children?
I agree very strongly with my honourable friend, and like him, I've seen some fantastic practice that works incredibly well. But it's not just that sometimes it can be variable, and we'll make sure that there are clear quality standards around more specialist provision in mainstream, and Ofsted will inspect against that. But also just the nature in terms of the amount of provision that's available can also vary hugely across an area. That's why I've set out our expectation that every secondary school will have an inclusion base, and we will have a similar number of inclusion bases in local primary schools. That's so that everyone comes together and does what is necessary to deliver a fully inclusive mainstream system that better caters for children with complex needs, with special needs, but also working together with the specialist sector to deliver that.
We are under huge time pressure. There's another statement and then 2 items of protected business. Not everybody is going to get in. Please keep questions short and answers just as short, Secretary of State. Charlie Dewhurst.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Now, I do welcome the ambition here to look again at the funding formula, which so disadvantages children in my constituency, and also the additional provision for children with SEND in mainstream settings. But for many children, that isn't appropriate, and they do need a specialist setting. And one of the biggest problems I have locally is a lack of places in our special schools. So in places like Bridlington, where we have a plan for a new 120-place school, which was approved in May 2024, can we ensure that officials in her department work with my local authority to get that school built at the earliest possible opportunity?
Madam Deputy Speaker, we are investing more in specialist provision, including specialist provision in mainstream, and we've set out £3.7 billion of capital investment to make that happen. But I'd be more than happy to make sure that the honourable gentleman has a meeting with officials or with the Minister to discuss the case further.
John Trickett.
I today heard from one of my constituents struggling, in agony almost, with trying to get proper recognition of his children's needs. When can he and everybody else expect to see results from the Secretary of State's announcement? And on the attainment gap, will she look particularly at the coalfield communities? For example, in my constituency, the least deprived, 50% or more, are achieving the targets for GCSEs, but the least deprived, less than a quarter. It's totally unacceptable.
Madam Deputy Speaker, as a fellow Coalfields MP, I'd be more than happy to do that. And I recognise what my honourable friend says about the challenges that families are currently facing. And my message to parents is that Whilst we want to ensure a phased and careful transition from the system that we have to the better system that I do believe is possible, we will be investing now from this year, investing in the capital, in the people, in the training, to make that system work better, far more quickly, alongside that bigger change.
Rebecca Paul.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I start by drawing attention to my register of interest? I think for my constituents in Reigate, Redhill, Banstead and our villages, the key concern I hear from parents and carers is that they've been fighting for years to get support, or they're still fighting now to get that support. Can the Education Secretary reassure my constituents that they won't lose this hard-fought for support that they're entitled to?
Madam Deputy Speaker, we will be expanding and improving support for more children in our system with greater legal rights for a greater number of children, and making sure that when parents need that support, when children are struggling, we don't wait for arbitrary, lengthy bureaucratic processes, we get on and deliver it.
Samantha Niblett.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I was grateful to the Secretary of State for coming to my constituency and meeting with some SEND parents in Swadlincote. They felt heard. So I just want to say thank you for the way that she is delivering this white paper, but and that it's not just a case of, here you go, this is what we're going to do to you, which is what these people have been used to for so long, but actually we want to hear from you. So I will be having a consultation meeting with my constituents where I'll be very much interested in hearing what they've got to say.
Kate.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend and to every member across this House, both on these benches and across the House, for the contributions that they have shared around the experiences of their families and their constituents. Their voices have been heard loud and clear through this process. We have taken the time to ensure that the reforms that we are setting out are the right ones and reflect parents' views. But we are, of course, continuing that consultation. I look forward to my honourable friend sharing further thoughts from her constituents.
Josh Boberinde.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Hundreds of schools across the country have received cash under the school rebuilding programme, including Cavendish School, my old school, in Eastbourne. Some of them received that cash some time ago, put their plans in place some time ago, but now their obligations and their responsibilities are going to change and increase. So what steps will the Secretary of State take to support those schools, to adjust those plans if needed, and what permissions will she allow them to do just that?
Madam Deputy Speaker, we've set out our education estate strategy, which is about ensuring that all schools are inclusive by design, and that when we are building new schools or significantly refurbishing new schools, we make sure that inclusion is right at the heart and that we are building schools to last. And if the honourable gentleman would like to share further information, I'd be happy to look into it.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As a former teacher, which I obviously very rarely mention, can I emphasise enough how much hope this white paper gives me? The reality is residents in my constituency of Harlow who got EHCPs found they weren't worth the paper they were written on, with schools actually unable to provide the so-called legal requirements they were supposed to provide. So can the Secretary of State detail a little bit more how these reforms will benefit parents and children in my constituency of Harlow who have battled a broken system for too long?
Secretary of State.
Madam Deputy Speaker, our intention is that parents in Harlow and across the country don't have the same fight that they have had for far too long. That when a need is identified, where a child is struggling or extra support is required, that our schools have the resources and the expertise to put that in place straight away without the need for parents to go anywhere near a tribunal.
Alison Griffiths.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In my Bognor Regis and Littlehampton constituency and across West Sussex, the number of EHCPs has risen by 75% since 2019, but the funding to support that only by 37%. Can the Secretary of State give reassurance to parents that the correct funding, not just £24,000 per school, will be in place to support this?
Madam Deputy Speaker, we are investing more in support for children. The extra £4 billion I've announced today, alongside funding that has already gone into the high needs block and other funding that's gone into schools. What I would say on EHCPs is that part of the reason I believe we have seen such a big increase in the number is, yes, of course, down to need, and we face growing need. We see that internationally. But EHCPs have become the only vehicle for lots of parents to get the support their children need. That's part of the reason we see such a sharp increase. And that's why we need to rebalance the system so that we address need, identify need and put in place support quickly before needs escalate.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Many constituents have spoken to me about their absolute despair about the SEND system, and it was their feedback, along with schools, SENCOs and professional organisations, which helped me produce my report, Better SEND Support for Stafford, Eccleshall and the Villages, which the Minister kindly took a copy of, and I know has fed into this. I'm particularly pleased and welcome the aspect of early intervention, the increase in that. Could the Minister speak a little bit more about how they intend to implement that in towns like Stafford?
Yeah. I'm grateful to my honourable friend for sharing the views of her constituents and for professionals across her constituency as we brought forward this work. For example, through our Best Start family hubs that we're rolling out across the country, we will make sure that there is a SEND trained professional in every setting. The reason we do that is that the evidence is so clear that if we identify needs sooner, we prevent problems from escalating. The evidence was clear when the Sure Start programme was in operation, and what that demonstrated was that if we meet needs when children are young, if we back families and we put in place that support, we reduce the need and the crisis level intervention that sadly we see further down the line.
Mike Martin.
On the white paper. She clearly cares about this, which bodes well for the outcome. For too long, the costs of SEND support have fallen on local authorities, and that's had a knock-on effect on other services that they provide, like libraries and roads. It now seems, if I'm reading this right, that much of that cost will come back to the DfE. So what does that mean for local authority budgets? Will they then be raided and brought across to the DfE, or will they be kept the same?
Madam Deputy Speaker, through what we've already set out around local government funding, we are putting in place support for councils to deal with the long-standing deficits that have accrued, but I do want to be absolutely clear that that support is conditional upon local authorities working with us to provide the places and deliver the clear systems of support that families all too often find are not there. But the wider pressures that we see will be met by government. We will do what we need to do, but alongside that we need both health and local authorities to play their part as well.
Mohammed Hussain.
Madam Deputy Speaker, parents, teachers and children recognise the need for SEND reform and stronger inclusion. But can the Secretary of State confirm that inclusion will not mean conformity? That children who do not meet the EHCP threshold will still receive full special support without a fight? That the fully funded workforce plan is in place to provide the expertise needed for every child to thrive, and a mechanism to appeal against a decision if parents want to do that?
Yes, Madam Deputy Speaker, we will make sure that children get the support without the need for that to escalate. And it was also a pleasure to join my honourable friend at a family hub in his constituency and to see at first hand what can be achieved when we support children when they're young, when we back families and where we really invest in their futures.
Smith.
Madam Deputy Speaker, schools right across my constituency already have inclusion bases, but there's already tension often between the schools and the parents who want better support through the EHCPs that they're having to wait for. So I was just wondering what the Secretary of State has been thinking around ensuring that those relationships between schools and parents remain strong and that we're inadvertently not pitting parents against teachers given this new role that schools are going to be playing.
I agree that it will be essential for schools and parents to work together, and government too. And the vision of the white paper is a system where we all honour our responsibilities as government, as schools and as parents to work together to deliver better outcomes for children. And we also set out clear expectations in the white paper about the engagement that schools should be undertaking with parents, but also parents' responsibilities to support their child's school, to do everything they can around attendance and in making sure that they're supporting their child's school in that approach, and that's something we'll continue.
Croft.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I would like to declare an interest. I have the honour of being a parent to a disabled child who has an EHCP. I very much welcome the Secretary of State's statement today. It, I think, is a true reflection of the amount of engagement that her and her department have carried out with parents, with families, with children with SEND themselves and with the sector. A couple of points that I would welcome some clarity on. I welcome the move to make a much less adversarial system for parents and to actually allow parents to get on with the job of of being mum and dad. But I would welcome some clarity on where the kind of accountability is built into the system, particularly as related to individual support plans. I'd welcome some clarity as to whether accountability will be placed more on health authorities, who often have about a 50% onus of delivering certain services, but at the moment there is no statutory duty on them to do so. And I'd also welcome clarity on whether guidance around the reasonable adjustment framework in schools might be strengthened, and how parents can hold schools and settings accountable if they do not meet their duties under Equality Act framework.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend and for all of the time that she has taken to speak with me and with colleagues in the department to share her experiences as a parent, but also understanding the wider shift that we need to see. And she asks a number of detailed questions. I'll respond briefly, but I'm happy, of course, to discuss further. Through individual support plans, we do need to make sure that there is accountability around that, and through complaints panels, there will be an independent SEND professional as a part of that. Yes, absolutely, health authorities must play their full role alongside local authorities in delivering better support. She is right to identify the need for clarity around reasonable adjustments, what that means for schools, and we will be setting out further detail on that.
Suella Braverman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Currently, there are too many parents battling a system which is costly, bureaucratic and slow. But will the Secretary of State confirm that none of her changes announced today will help those parents currently in the system this year, currently in the system next year, or even the year after that? And what her changes do is create a decade of uncertainty.
Madam Deputy Speaker, no, she's wrong, and if she'd listened, she'd know she was wrong. But she wouldn't like to break the habits of a lifetime, I'm sure. She, of course, before asking any questions of this government, what we are doing, should consider the actions that she was responsible for as part of that government.
Stin Madders.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Can I first of all declare my interest as my wife's a teacher? In her statement, the Secretary of State spoke about her desire for schools to be a welcoming environment for children. And that really matters because quite often when a school implies that it might not be the right setting for a child, that can be the start of multiple battles with the council, with the other schools, with the NHS, and every stage of that is a rejection for the child. So how can we ensure that we fix the system, that we also fix the culture as well?
My honourable friend is right, and this is about collaboration, not just between government and schools, but between schools and parents too. And some of the best examples that I've seen, including through our Partnership for Inclusion around neurodiversity in schools, our PINS programme, shows what can be achieved when parents work with schools to understand where children are struggling, to put in place changes, often quite small, practical changes at the start of the school day or during the school day that can make a huge difference both to a child's attendance, their belonging, and their outcomes in school. And I look forward to working with them further on this.
Ben Obsujecti.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It wasn't lost on me this morning that the Secretary of State announced the SEND White Paper in Peterborough, just down the road from my Huntingdon constituency, and therefore comes very much under Cambridgeshire County Council, who have a terrible record of delivering EHCPs. I've spoken to dozens of schools in my constituency and also hundreds of parents, and they are beside themselves at the length of time it's taking for Cambridgeshire County Council to deliver those EHCPs, not just within the 20 weeks statutory time frame, sometimes 20 months plus. So could she just reassure my constituents how these plans will immediately address those concerns around the delivery of EHCPs and make a real difference to those children who are waiting for those much needed plans?
Madam Deputy Speaker, this will be a careful and phased transition, but we will be putting more support in place from this year to allow children to access support more quickly than is the case right now, and we absolutely will be holding local authorities accountable for delivery.
Perkins.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I congratulate my right honourable friend on securing the extra funding. But even with that, there will never be enough money to go round. So does she agree with me that getting decisions made by experts closer to our children in their communities is not only going to improve service, but will actually make sure we use those precious resources more wisely?
Yes, absolutely, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I agree with my honourable friend. I've heard time and again from parents that decisions are often made about children that haven't actually been seen recently by the professional who is making those decisions. That's why bringing more support closer to the child within school and much closer at home will make a huge difference in terms of the quality of the provision, as well as making sure it happens far more quickly.
Brown Fuller.
Deputy Speaker, in the government's white paper, it talks about having an expert teacher in every room, and that's certainly a problem in the profession, with 1 in 3 teachers leaving after 5 years of service. Chichester University has created a teacher training programme that embeds inclusivity at the root of every module rather than teaching it as a separate module. So would the Secretary of State please join me in Chichester to talk to the faculty that are leading this programme so that every child in this country can benefit from their sort of teaching? Yeah.
I'd certainly be interested in hearing more about the approach that's being taken, because we have made big strides forward in initial teacher training. The extra investment that we're putting in will support existing teachers and staff working in the profession. But there is more to do, and we are committed to continuing to review standards around initial teacher training, and I'd be very happy if the Honourable Lady would share some more details with me.
Janet Davey.
Deputy Speaker. Thank you. I thank the Secretary of State for her statement and for the white paper and for her team and all the hard work that's gone into it. In my previous profession as a children and families fostering social worker, one of the difficulties that foster carers had was the assessment of children with special educational needs. It often made the placement, their home, very vulnerable and sometimes caused a placement breakdown. I think it would be really helpful if the Secretary of State could say how she would measure success in this area for SEND children. Yeah.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend, and of course she not only did that role in a former life, but through the work she did in the department, she has helped to shape what we're setting out today, and I'm grateful to her for her passion and her commitment and dedication to all children, especially those who have often been through the children's social care system and whose outcomes are often even worse than children with SEND, and where there is a clear overlap between those groups. My view as to what constitutes success is more children having support put in place more quickly and fundamentally better outcomes for those children. And that means better academic outcomes. It means better outcomes as they move out of education into adult life, as far as possible, able to live independent, fulfilling lives. And at the moment, sadly, what we see is that too many young people are denied that opportunity.
Ben Spencer.
Madam Deputy Speaker. Clearly the system needs reform, but for many families who've managed to get through the system and get an EHCP, they'll be quite concerned by the announcements and the uncertainty today. I note that the government anticipates that by the end of this decade there'll be a reduction in those children receiving the highest need. Does she believe that's due to a reduction in their need or a reduction in provision?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I take my responsibilities incredibly seriously on this point to make sure that we don't unduly alarm parents, and we set out the facts and the details. And what will happen between now and 2030 is that we anticipate, as things stand, the number of EHCPs will increase. It will then start to plateau and will start to reduce. We are not chasing an arbitrary reduction or an arbitrary number or a target. But I do hope that we can bring that number down more quickly through early support, not through shifting the system to get an outcome, but because we are meeting need more quickly. That's what parents want to see, and that's what I believe in.
Rachel Blake.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Constituents of mine have told me that they do want to see mainstream schools ready to support their children, but they have also asked me to ask the Secretary of State about who will be defining complexity and how will that be defined, and how will local schools be held to account to make sure that they are providing exactly the right support for those children who do fit into that description of complexity.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I understand the point that my honourable friend raises, and I'm grateful to her. We will create a set of nationally consistent specialist provision packages underpinned by clear national standards, shaped by experts, defined by experts and put on statute, so that we bring an end to the postcode lottery and ensure consistency wherever you happen to be.
Adrian Ramsey.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I welcome the ambition in this white paper, particularly on ensuring that younger people are supported earlier. It has to be the right aim that more young people can be supported within mainstream settings. So is the Secretary of State committed to understanding the reasons why there's been a big increase in the number of young people who can't be supported in mainstream school, including providing the funding and support to schools needed? And does she accept that at the same time there isn't currently enough capacity in the alternative provision for those young people for whom mainstream school is not working?
Speaker, there is complexity around this, and we do need to continue to understand the needs that we are seeing developing, and a failure to meet that sooner. That is a big part of the challenge. We have not, as a country, been meeting need as quickly as we should. I would also add that for too long we've treated the SEND system as an entirely separate part of the education system, not as central to our schools. That is the shift that we will bring, and that is how we will make sure that all of our schools better cater for a wider range of need.
Commend my right honourable friend for grasping this nettle. It's long overdue. But she will know as much as all of us know through our casework that diagnosis leads to a delay in getting the EHCP plan and a delay to parents being able to advocate on behalf of their children. Now, if we're going to see fewer children getting EHCP plans in the future, then how are we going to ensure that parents can act as advocates for their children right the way through their pathway?
Madam Deputy Speaker, EHCPs will retain an important role within the system, and diagnosis will remain important. But I know from many of the parents that I've spoken to, and I'm sure he has too, that sometimes diagnosis only confirms what is already known about the need that a child is displaying and the support that is required. So through the investment we're setting out, through the changes that we're bringing, we will make sure that diagnosis is not required to access the support that a child needs. And in many cases, if we put that support in place more quickly, we will prevent problems from escalating and help children to thrive.
Dr Andrew Morrison.
In April 2024, a much-needed SEND school at Bitham Park in Westbury, in my constituency, was given the green light by Wiltshire Council and by the DFE with a planned in-service date for later this year. The incoming Labour government put that on pause. Can the Minister say whether it is her intention to go ahead with that school in Westbury, and if so, provide a timeline?
We are putting in place significant extra investment at £3.7 billion of capital to deliver what's needed around specialist provision and making sure that local areas are able to deliver what's required. I'd be happy to look into the individual case that the right honourable gentleman raises and make sure he gets a full response.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I want to thank Bournemouth parents and teachers for shaping this plan. I can see their views within it. I particularly want to thank Andrew and Claire and their lovely son and his lovely grandparent. In Bournemouth, teachers have been calling out for national support. They've got that with £165 million of BCP Council's debt being paid off with the return of the new short starts, with the £1.6 million promised for mainstream education, and now with £1.8 million for things like educational psychologists. Will the Secretary of State set out how quickly we will recruit and train those educational psychologists so we can get them into the system? Because if we support our school system, we help to fix our SEND system.
Secretary of State.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend and for making sure that his constituents' views have been right at the heart of the reform that we're bringing. We will be moving rapidly to invest more in recruiting more speech and language therapists, more educational psychologists, but we also need to retain more of those brilliant people who've worked so hard to train to support children, and freeing up their time, less on bureaucracy, more on working together with children, will lead to much more fulfilling careers for those amazing people too.
House.
Madam Deputy Speaker, children with special educational needs, especially neurodiverse learners, thrive on creative subjects. But in the past decade, music, drama and art has been severely cut from the curriculum. How will this new white paper ensure that we broaden out the curriculum again to bring back the power of creative subjects?
I agree very strongly about the need for a curriculum that is both rich and broad, one that has a focus on both academic rigour but also on a wide range of opportunities, whether that is music, sport, art or drama. Through our response to the Curriculum and Assessment Review, we set out our intentions to make that a reality for every child, and through the changes that we're making to Progress 8, we will allow all children greater choice alongside that academic rigour to find what's right for them.
Sojourn Joseph.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. From the consultation events I held with parents, carers and teachers, the message was clear. It is crucial that SEND support starts early. So I welcome what my right honourable friend has said on this. As these proposals move forward, will the Education Secretary ensure that those with lived experience of the system remain central to the government's reforms to help ensure that SEND support is more personalised to every child's needs?
Secretary of State.
My honourable friend is right about the importance of early years, and early years sits right at the heart of our reforms around early identification of need, working together with families. Whilst we have had our big national conversation on SEND, that is only the start of the ongoing dialogue we want to continue with parents to make sure that as we bring forward these changes, as we implement these changes, that they work for parents and we make sure that their voices and the voices of children and young people continue to be heard.
Sir Julian Lewis.
May I invite the Secretary of State to expand a bit on her vision of what happens at the end of a SEND child's education. She mentioned the idea of independence and presumably as well socialisation to advance in society. In what way will her department be trying to shape the course to enable children born with a disadvantage to function productively in the real world at the end of the process?
State.
He is right that transition to adulthood, making sure that our children, as they move through the school system into adult life, are well prepared for what comes next. Now, many further education colleges, many specialist settings already do that incredibly well, but it is variable. And we want to deliver higher standards and greater opportunities for young people, particularly those with SEND, around supported internships, around options for work placements, and making sure that they can live independent lives as far as is possible.
Blake.
Speaker. I should declare an interest as the chair of the APPG on SEND, and my partner is currently training to be a teacher. I want to thank the front bench for the way they've conducted this review. I have to say I'm pleasantly surprised by many of the things that I've personally raised and people from my constituency have raised with me, seeing it in policies in here. I do just want to ask how we're going to make sure that the 7 packages or whatever that are set nationally do include the voice of lived experience, especially young people themselves, and how that process will be developed.
Secretary of State.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend, and it's been a real pleasure to work with her as we've brought forward these reforms. Through the specialist provision packages that we're setting out, they will be nationally set, led by experts, independent of government, with both health and education expertise, but we will make sure that the voices of children and young people, parents and campaigners are heard and understood as we develop those packages.
Deputy Speaker, I really welcome the language around belonging, especially as a SEND parent whose child told me once, "They don't want me here, Mum, do they?" before he was put out to specialist provision. But you can't have a broader, more inclusive curriculum if schools are facing cuts. And 2 of my schools, QE and Corfe Hills, are facing cuts of £700,000 or £800,000 next year. One cutting subjects, the other is slashing TAs and support staff, while the Trust is charging £750,000 to that school for central support. So what can the Secretary of State do to ensure more money reaches the teachers and the children and isn't being eaten up by the executives in trusts?
Secretary of State.
Madam Deputy Speaker, we've set out our intention to introduce inspection of trusts at trust level, and alongside that, renewed trust standards to make sure that all trusts are doing the best by children within their care. But I'm sure my honourable friend will be happy to discuss further the individual issues that the honourable lady raises.
Claire Hazelgrove.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I'll start by declaring an interest, both as a member of the APPG on SEND and as I have close family members with SEND needs. And I really welcome this focus on expanding and improving SEND support as well. Many of the themes in these new proposals today, from inclusion to tailored support, were raised by fellow residents across the Phillipson and Bradley Stoke constituency at my Coffee with Claire event on this, from which I shared feedback with ministers, so this has been great to see. Could the Education Secretary please set out how views of parents, carers and others have shaped and will continue to shape these proposals?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm grateful to my honourable friend for making sure that the views of parents and others in Phillipson and Bradley Stoke have been heard and are reflected in what we're setting out today. This is only the start of the engagement and the consultation. I would encourage parents in her constituency and parents across the country to look at what we've set out, to understand the ambition that we have for children with SEND and to take part in that consultation.
Richard Tice.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. There's much to reassure parents in these SEND reforms, in particular the reduction in the adversarial approach. I've spoken before about my concerns about the excessive fees and profits from some of the private equity-owned specialist schools. So can the Secretary of State confirm whether that legislation can be accelerated in order to reduce the pressure on council budgets?
State.
I'm slightly taken aback by that, Madam Deputy Speaker, but I welcome it. We are going to move fast to make sure that money intended for education is spent on education, and that does mean we are going to have to be much firmer and clearer, including with private equity, about the money that is going out of the system into profit rather than going into education. I suppose the one area I might just gently observe to the honourable gentleman is that I think there's a bit of a mix of views in his party about the approach on this and on SEND. And I've heard other other of his colleagues suggesting that that children with SEND are naughty and that their parents are just, it's bad parenting. So I'd suggest that Reform colleagues go away and have a little conflab and then come back.
Debbie Abrahams.
And I welcome my right honourable friend's statement today. We know that young people with special educational needs or disabilities are 3 times and have multiple disadvantage, are 3 times more likely to be NEET, not in education, employment or training. I appreciate very much what my right honourable friend is saying about reducing the attainment gaps. Can she expand a little bit more on that? And also to pick up on my friend's point about co-production, and making sure that people with lived experience and parents as well are engaged in this.
I agree with my honourable friend, and through the national conversation that we have had on SEND, we've also had our SEND development group who've worked really closely with ministers and with my honourable friend to make sure that the voices of children, families and experts, including disability rights groups and children's groups, have been heard as we've developed our reforms, and we will continue in that spirit as we take forward the consultation. She is right that there are huge differences in outcomes for children with SEND. The gap between the GCSE results of children with SEND and their peers without SEND hasn't meaningfully narrowed in recent years, nor has the likelihood of sustaining education, employment or training after 16. A big part of that has to be about making sure that outcomes for children are better going through our mainstream system, where we know with the right support, academic outcomes are stronger for children with SEND.
Adam Dance.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's good to see the White Paper recognises the need to develop systems to help with early identification. Best Start hubs, the phonics screener and schools sharing best practice. But it is not going to be enough. So what steps will the Secretary of State take to research, develop and fund universal screening programmes that can start in year 1 so school is inclusive for all, once and for all?
So he is right that we are expanding Best Start family hubs. We are making sure that there is a real focus on early years. We are investing more than £9 billion in expanding early years entitlements. We have also set an incredibly ambitious target about a record number of children reaching a good level of development at the early years foundation stage. We know if we do that, if we secure that, then more children go on to do well later on in life.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Public Accounts Committee has been looked at the costs of home-to-school transport. Clearly one of the drivers is the cost of sending kids with special needs miles away from their home to very expensive private schools. The government has announced help on the statutory overrides that have been incurred by local authorities with regard to these costs recently and currently. But given these reforms she's announced today, which I very much welcome, are going to take some time to come into effect, will she give a guarantee now that local authorities are not going to have to rely on statutory overrides to continue to provide their statutory duties in future?
Secretary of State.
So beyond the period that my right honourable friend identifies, that will then become the responsibility of central government. That's the commitment that we have given. It is a big undertaking that we have made with colleagues across government to take action on the long-standing deficits that local authorities have accrued over time. And he is right that the way in which we can respond to the challenges local authorities are facing around home-to-school transport is by improving provision closer to home. Councils do not want to be sending children far from home. Parents certainly do not want their children spending hours in taxis to access provision. And that's why the extra capital investment and the 60,000 new places that we will create will, over time, bring down some of those costs that councils are facing.
Alison Bennett.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm pleased that the White Paper does make one mention of young carers, and it rightly notes that young carers pay a huge price for their caring, for their siblings and their family members. I'm sure she agrees that it's vital that we both identify and support young carers. So will she support my call to make young carers eligible for the pupil premium?
Madam Deputy Speaker, we will be consulting on disadvantaged funding, including the pupil premium and the national funding formula, and how we ensure that we are halving that disadvantage gap and having the biggest impact from the £8 billion of funding that we are spending. I will look at the issue she's identified. If she wants to share that further, I'd be happy to consider it.
Daniel Francis.
I'm declaring interest as my wife is a Senko and one of our children has an HCP. Now, I know as the parent of twins that I've had to fight for virtually none of one of my children's education, but every single aspect of my other child's education because she is disabled. And what I will say, and what I've heard very clearly from my constituents in Bexley and Crayford, is those aspects, such as we heard from my honourable friend from Thurrock, holding ICBs to account, those transition stages, both at primary and secondary, but also at the end of secondary, we must get right. I absolutely welcome the proposals here today, but will the Secretary of State give us that assurance that during the consultation we will hear those voices and get that right for those families I represent?
My honourable friend speaks with real passion and expertise, and I could not agree more with him. That as well as everything that we are doing as a government, we will need local authorities and ICBs to work together with us to deliver the change that is needed. There is huge variation across the country, unacceptable outcomes, too many delays and children waiting far too long for the support that they need. But he will also see, through the consultation, we are also committed to ensuring that children with the most complex needs have that support in place much more quickly than is the situation right now.
Monica Harding. Claire Young.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and I too am a member of the SEND APPG. Historic unfair underfunding in South Gloucestershire has made it harder for schools to support children with SEND, and parents tell me that they're concerned that these changes could make the situation worse. If those fears fuel a surge in EHCP applications in the short term, what steps will the government take to ensure that councils are properly funded to deal with this, so that during the change, children don't miss out on vital support?
Secretary of State.
Madam Deputy Speaker, that underlines the importance of the investment getting to the front line and delivering really quickly, because we know the pressures that are faced by children and families. But I would say that there is huge variation in terms of the approach that some councils have taken that cannot be adequately justified by funding settlements alone. We have seen some very affluent councils in very affluent areas delivering incredibly poor quality provision. And I say to those authorities, we will hold them to account for delivering better outcomes for their families.
Final question, Sarah Russell.
In terms of the points raised about funding, Cheshire is also struggling significantly with underfunding per pupil. In terms of how we then roll out the funding for these changes, will that follow the existing formula or will that be revised?
Madam Deputy Speaker, through what I've set out today, we are consulting further on many aspects of the funding, including the national funding formula. We will continue to look closely at how we can ensure that all children, wherever they are in the country, get the support that they need, and her constituents will benefit from Best Start Family Hubs, from the expansion of childcare and from the expansion of Experts at Hand, the new initiative that we're putting in place to make sure that children get the support within school more quickly.
That is the end of the statement. I'll give the front benches a few moments to shuffle over.